Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryam karavavahe, tejasvina vadhitamastu, ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We're going to continue in verse 30, and it's going to speak about the vision, samadarshanam, of the wise person, the vision of oneness. And we're going to extend upon what this vision is exactly. Together. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra, sarvam chamai pashyati, tasyaham na pranashyami, sachame na pranashyati. What it's saying here is the one who is established in me alone, capital Me, meaning the self. So when Krishna speaks of me, he's speaking about what? Who's this me? Ishvara alone. So Ishvara is speaking through Krishna. Krishna is just an incarnation to address a particular problem, and thus Krishna is speaking as Ishvara. So what it's saying is the one who is established in me and sees me everywhere, everywhere means what? In all things, sentient and insentient, he is not lost to me. Why is he or she not lost to me, that is Ishvara? Because, verse 29, hard work came prior, consistent viveka, atman anatman, causes one to not forget even amidst family affairs. So, in verse 30, we're now beginning an important topic or introducing of Bhakti. So, Krishna has not spoken about Bhakti, that is devotion. Krishna will briefly introduce non-dual Advaita Bhakti. Advaita Bhakti, which is the greatest. Why is it the greatest? Because to see Atma in all, what greater is there than that? To see Ishvara in everything. That is, to see not only Ishvara in a particular form, it's called Ishta Devata, a personal form. Like I see it only in Jesus, you see it in Krishna, someone else sees it in Rama, someone else sees it in Allah. That's not what we're talking about. That's all lower form of bhakti, which we will now get into. The highest form of bhakti is to see the one same Ishvara in all things, not just in a temple or a church, but in the smallest, most ordinary and mundane things in life. In other words, to appreciate Atma, meaning the self, which is in and through all things, that is the highest bhakti. What is Atma? The self. What is the self? Awareness. Awareness meaning what? Brahman. So, to see the self in all things, what is the self? Consciousness, which is operating through this body-mind complex, is the same consciousness that is operating through your body-mind complex. The body-mind is different, the consciousness is the same. Now, to see that consciousness, see means what? To understand that that consciousness that I am is also the consciousness operating in every body here, that alone is the absolute highest bhakti, which means that to understand that Atma is my nature, and that same nature is also your nature. Or from your point of view, you also say, Atma is my nature, and that nature is also your nature, from your point of view. So, Atma is one. Everyone listening here, it's the same consciousness operating through different body minds. This is why we all have a different personality, because every mind has a different complexity. So obviously everyone's going to be different. Sarvatra Atma Darshanam, the vision of Atma, is actually what? Sarvatra Ishvara Darshanam. That's an important statement. To see yourself in everyone is to see God in everyone. Sarvatra Atma Darshanam equals Sarvatra Ishvara Darshanam. To recognize yourself is to recognize God. Where is God? Your awareness is Ishvara, and Ishvara is your awareness. Remember, Ishvara is not apart from Brahman. Because what do we say about Ishvara? When Brahman's power, Maya Shakti, expresses in creation, that Brahman takes a new name called Ishvara. So thus, it means what? Ishvara is actually of Brahman. So when I say to see Atman in everyone, I'm actually saying what? To see Ishvara in everyone. Why? Because Atman is Brahman, and Ishvara is not apart from Brahman. So to recognize your awareness is to recognize God. So this is the highest form. And how is this highest form that we speak of possible? Only through self-knowledge. Atma-jnanam. So we're not speaking about a lower form of bhakti. What is lower form of bhakti? It is to say that Lord is not everywhere. That means to limit God in a particular place, in a particular mind for a short time, between 8 and 9, or 7 and 8, or whatever time. As soon as the meditation ends, God goes. So this is a lower form of bhakti. Now, when I say lower, I did not insult or put it down. I just said it is a different level. So this is simply about recognizing what belongs to where. Everything is a stepping stone. I can only get to a higher step if I stepped on a previous lower step. In the same manner, lower form of bhakti, that is to recognize that God alone is in one form, is only what? A stepping stone to ultimately recognize that Ishvara is not only in one form, but it's in all forms. Even in the Bhagavatam, the Gopika Gita, there is a story of the gopis who worship the Lord, and they're happy when he's there. But obviously, when they stop thinking about him, the Lord goes away. So then they cry. So this is all a lower form of bhakti, and it is necessary. So the higher form of bhakti is not this, just to be very clear. This means you can never be away from the substratum or the truth of the entire universe. Thus, there is nothing that you can specifically pray to which is more important than anything else. This means a street is equatable to a temple. Ultimately, it's all one and the same because it represents temple, so we would associate a higher status to it, and thus we express a greater devotion to a temple and less devotion to a street. And yet, ultimately, they're both just Pancha Mahabhuta, 5 elements. The lower form is what we call apara, matter, or form bhakti. That means I am devoted to a particular form. Another name is Dvaita bhakti. That means bhakti which involves me to see Ishvara in one form, but not in another form. Or another name is Bheda bhakti. Bheda means body. In other words, to demonstrate devotion towards a particular body. So after this lower bhakti, we have to then eventually come to the stage of gaining self-knowledge. In fact, one recognizes the limitations of praying to particular Ishta Devata, and this limitation transforms into looking for the answer. I'm saying this because nothing deserves to be put down in this world. It is just a stepping stone to the higher. And you can see how everything in this world just operates as a stepping stone. Why are we here? Because we were on certain stepping stones which led us here. So this Atma, which is what? All-pervading, Krishna says, is actually Ishvara. So now you have to start to understand that your awareness is Ishvara. And Ishvara is not apart from what? Brahman. So again, a personal God is not the real Bhagavan, because it is limited to space and time, to a particular place. We call it Maya Manusha Veshaha. Manusha means human, Veshaha means costume. A Maya generated human costume. So this kind of form is not real or proper. As I said, it's only a stepping stone. If I'm praying to a particular form, which is what? Of Maya, Maya Manusha Veshaha, and at the same time, why am I praying to the form? To try to discover the truth, to quote, get out of Maya. So what? I'm praying to a Maya human costume, reinforcing Maya, while my attempt is to get out of Maya. So this is why one has to eventually move up, because it's a cycle of spiritual samsara. It seems like I'm doing some effort by going to temples, offering flowers, prostrating, but actually I'm what? Individuating the whole into a particular. The whole being Ishvara, and I'm putting it into a limited, finite form. So this is the essence of Advaita Bhakti. And Krishna also says that not everyone knows what Ishvara is. In fact, most of us in the world don't know what Ishvara is. We keep saying God, this word, it comes a lot, but nobody actually knows what it is. What happens then is there are projections. So then Krishna says, people think that I am a human form. And what happens when God is equated to human form? Then we project whatever human conditions we have onto God. This is why you will find in many religions, in sections of religions, how are gods described? Angry, right? Who want to destroy and punish and burn. Why? Because the writer, the interpreter of the original text or whatever the philosophy was, doesn't know what God is. So he has no, or she has no choice but to what? Project their ideas onto the macrocosmic. Vyashti, individual, onto samashti, the macrocosmic. So you can see why and how these scriptures get contaminated through time, because the very interpreter does not know what God is. Thus, they have no choice but to superimpose their human attributes onto the total. And then the rest of the audience reads that, and they also don't know any better because they haven't been taught. So they just take up this God of destruction as the God of the universe. So, Yaha Mam Sarvatra Pashyati. He who sees me everywhere. Who is that he? Ajnani. So that person sees Atma everywhere. Means what? He actually sees the Lord everywhere. Because Atma is not apart from the Lord. If you see yourself, if you recognize yourself, you're recognizing what? God. That's why it's not a big thing. It's not strange to know what God is. How do you know God? Who is the one that's aware? Whoever that is, that's Ishvara. It's that easy. When can you never not access awareness? That's exactly why Ishvara is formless, beyond time, always accessible, and so is Brahman, formless, beyond time, always accessible. Thus, there is no actual difference. It means what? Seeing the self is seeing Ishvara. Seeing Ishvara is seeing the self. So Atma is Chaitanya Swarupa. Atma means what? The self, the awareness operating through your body, mind, intellect. And Ishvara is also Chaitanyam Swarupa. What's the nature of the wave in the ocean? Water. What's the nature of the entire ocean? Water. So there's actually no difference between what inheres in both the total and what inheres in the individual, the samashti and the vyashti. So thus, when the wave thinks of itself as the water, is it including the ocean? It is. Why is it including the ocean? Because what it's thinking of is what? Water. But what's the entire ocean made of? Water. So when the wave thinks of itself as the water, it's actually simultaneously including the entire ocean, because the ocean is nothing but the water. Bhagavan is there in everyone. Let's use the ocean analogy. The ocean is there in every wave as what? The water. So Bhagavan is there in everyone. Why is the wave sentient? Because of what? The water and the ocean at the same time. Because all of the waves are in the ocean, and both the wave and the ocean both share the one same water. That means both you and Ishvara share the same truth, which is what? Consciousness. Chaitanyam Swarupam. Not only does he see the Lord everywhere, what does this mean? Not only does the wave see the ocean everywhere, can the wave see the ocean? No, because the ocean is too big for the wave. But then why does it say in this verse that the wise person recognizes the ocean everywhere? Because the ocean is what? Equatable to Ishvara. Because the whole ocean is of the water. So to recognize oneself as the water is to recognize the entire ocean simultaneously. You understand? Not only does he see everything in Ishvara, but also sees Ishvara in everything. Both ways. So if we, for example, compare Ishvara to space, because that's the closest element, the subtle element that we have to compare the formless, then can you say God is Rama? Because if I say Rama, I'm what? I've just isolated Ishvara to one single nama rupa, one single form. God cannot be defined. No matter what name we give it, we just what? We limited it to that name. Just like space. Can you define space? No. Or let's ask this way. Does space care if you define it or not? Space continues being space no matter what you say about it. Whether I want to call space Krishna or Rama, it still continues being totally uninfluenced, unaffected, unimpacted by my attempts to isolate it to a particular name and form. In the same way, no matter what attempts we try to grasp Ishvara, Ishvara doesn't care, because Ishvara is everywhere. So the all-pervading what? Ocean, because it pervades what? Every single form, every single wave, is only what? Atma alone. And what is Atma? Water operating through what? The individual waves. So for example, imagine you have 5 laptops. And every laptop obviously has a different operating system. One's Windows XP, one's Android, one's iOS, one's Windows 10, one's Linux. Now, the laptop has a body, of course. Every body has the laptop body has a different combination, different look. Some are slower, some are faster. So they all share a different personality. And not only that, but they have a different hard drive. So the data on each laptop is different. Which means what? The display is going to show different personality based on the data in the hard drive. Can the hard drive, the data that's being shown on the screen, recognize the electricity that's flowing through all 5 laptops? Can it describe the electricity that is making it work? So no matter what it does, it can't grasp the very principle that it's making it think what is electricity. In the same way, we cannot grasp all pervasiveness. As soon as we grasp it, we've limited it into something that is in front of me. But consciousness is what? Prior to all things, and both in and through. Thus, I cannot grasp what is all pervading and what's making everything function and even making this body-mind think right now. In the same way, one electricity flowing through 5 laptops, or however many people, and that one consciousness is what? Working in and through every single person and making them do and think whatever they're thinking. So that one consciousness that we're speaking of, that pervades the entire universe, all universes by the way, is Atman. And that Atman, because it's all pervading, cannot be apart from you, because you are also what? Working and functioning. You're also what? Expressing the contents of your hard drive. And the only way for the hard drive to express its contents is how? By electricity flowing through it. If there's no electricity, there's nothing on the display. So the question is then, why do we worship form? If God is formless and cannot be grasped, why do we then, most of us, at the beginning, subscribe to worshiping isolated forms in different names and forms? Allah, Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, Rama.
It's a stepping stone.
Excellent. It is stepping stone. Why is it a stepping stone? Because if the mind is gross, okay, what is Ishvara? The subtlest of the subtlest. Now, how does the ordinary person generally live in the world? Identified with what? Gross objects. So this means what? If the mind is adapted to only identifying with gross objects, that means what? The mind itself is gross. And what's Ishvara? The subtlest of the subtlest. Gross can never know the subtle. Only the subtle can know the gross. So in other words, what is the point of worshiping forms? In order to condition the mind to what? Make it more subtle. So the more subtle the mind is, the closer it is to that which is formless. So the closer the mind is to what? A stage of subtleness, the more easier it can appreciate this Atma, the truth in all things, Ishvara. This is why it's very hard to know God other than just mere intellectual words. You know, God is all pervasive, omniscient, omnipotent, all these words that fly around. They're all what? They're just words, gross words. But to actually appreciate what it means to say that, only the one who's got a subtle mind, to them it's an entirely different story or experience to say that God is omniscient. Because why? The mind that's subtle, when it says it, it's a different experience than the one who's gross. So it really is coming down to making the mind extremely subtle, which is why chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, involves meditation, Nididhyasanam, constantly abiding in this knowledge to make the mind subtle. Why do we want to make the mind subtle? To appreciate the self. What is the self? Ishvara. Ishvara and the self, they're not apart. So this means that a jnani is never apart from Lord, from God. How can you be? Because to know yourself as consciousness is to know yourself as that which inheres also what? Ishvara. So you cannot say, I am God. Please notice. The wave cannot say, I am the ocean. Is there any confusion about that? The wave can only say what? I am water. It cannot say, there is a difference, but there is a sameness. You just need to know where is the difference and where is the sameness. A human being is just a microcosmic expression of the total. The individual is not the total. From the aspect of that which inheres both the total and the individual, there is a sameness, yes. But we cannot equate ourselves and run around saying, I am Ishvara. You're not Ishvara, you're an individual. You can say, I'm consciousness, and the truth of both me and Ishvara is consciousness, that you can say. So, aham na pranashyami. So here Krishna says, I will never disappear. In other words, I'm never lost to that one who is firmly rooted in myself. So this means that such a person can never be blackmailed. A jnani can never be blackmailed or emotionally controlled. This only works on worldly people. Or let's just say this only works on someone who doesn't know oneself as independent of the world. So in most relationships, what happens is there's a subtle condition of blackmail because people are emotionally dependent. So if you don't do something for me, I will leave you. But this does not work on a jnani. Why? Because he or she knows that I'm completely independent of this world. It just doesn't work. So what's the advantage of this knowledge? You cannot be manipulated anymore. In subtle ways, in marketing ways, in ways that other sellers are trying to offer you something. You just can't be moved by interesting promises because, why? You know it's all going to come and go. And the truth of me is already here, now. And what is there greater than the all-pervading truth? Nothing. And you are that truth. So what more can someone give you than what you already are? So Jnani says, why should I be dependent on anyone? Because it's only painful, isn't it? To be dependent on someone, person. You don't even have to be wise to figure that out. Just the mere fact of being dependent can bring a lot of problems. Means that if that person stops giving me something, then I'm going to have an emotional upset about it. And then that's going to cause the person to go back into the samsara and chase a replacement model, a replacement part, to fill their need of emotional dependence. So understanding, quote, I am the whole, in itself solves so many problems instantly. No need to go to psychologists or therapies where they deal with what? Particular leaves on the tree. Just understand the whole tree is what? Maya. I am the soil of the tree. The tree depends on the self. Without the soil, the whole tree crumbles. So why should I go to the psychologist and address one little bit of that tree, one leaf? Let's face it, the tree is going to grow in the next season. That's the nature of the world. Now, sacha me na pranashyati. The last word, a wise person, does not disappear from me. In other words, the wise person cannot disappear from Ishvara. Why? Because the wise person took their time to recognize that there's no actual difference between self and, when it says me, we're talking about Ishvara. So to ascertain that there's no difference between self-awareness, that is, consciousness, and Ishvara means what? It instantly qualifies the statement, and we can say, he cannot disappear from me. She cannot disappear from me, because we are actually inseparable. To know yourself is to know God. So in other forms of bhakti, as soon as they leave that door, then instantly Ishvara disappear from him or her. And then they're back into what? Alternating between the truth and back into form. That's the worldly way. Alternate into the world of form, and then take some time into the church, the temple, offer some flowers, some puja, and then go back into the world. And then when we get tired of the world, go back into the temple. So this constant pendulum like swinging, this is the bhakti that has to be eventually dropped away, because it's just a stepping stone. Remember, Brahman cannot speak. Brahman needs Maya Shakti, a potential to create the world in order to say this. Without Maya, there's nothing to say. There's just pure consciousness. That's why we have to understand what it means to say I is actually what? Ishvara, and Ishvara is not apart from Brahman, so it's actually what? Consciousness speaking through its Maya Shakti in the reference point of creation. It becomes Ishvara, thus Ishvara is he, and he is the nature of Ishvara, which is what? Consciousness. What is the benefit of Nididhyasanam? Once again, you become the greatest bhakta in the world. How more great can one get than just seeing or finding it impossible not to see Ishvara everywhere? How much more can you ask than that? So what's the advantage of Nididhyasanam? I am never apart from the truth, from Ishvara. 631. Sarva bhuta sthitam yo mam bhajatye katvam asthitaha sarvatha vartamanopi sayogi mai vartate. The one who has attained the vision of oneness, we're talking about a jnani, that one worships me, Ishvara, who am present in all beings. So that yogi thus is in me. So the highest expression of bhakti for a jnani differs from regular worship. So a fully realized person's devotion is different from a worldly person's devotion. So the question is how? In what way is it different? So previously, we looked at God how? As a limited form, bound to a particular place in a particular temple. That means it's only in my temple. My God is not in your temple. It's only in my temple. And I cannot find your God in my temple. Your God belongs to your temple. So the selective choosing, the selective positioning of where and whose God is where, this is generally the state of the world. And what does this do? It creates this superimposition of human attributes onto the God which we're worshiping. So what does a person need? They need to be fed, they need to be cleaned, they need to be appeased. So what does this mean? If you study cultures closely and you look at the general ways of worship, what do people do in temples? Cleaning, bathing the feet of the Lord, decorating, putting flowers and different fragrances, putting different offerings. They're even to get into a temple, sometimes they say, have you bathed yourself? So what is this? This is actually, from a standpoint of Vedanta, it's actually an indirect insult, because the person who's saying that is what? Seeing you as a body-mind. So to say you need to be cleaned to go into the temple of the Lord means what? The Lord only desires cleanliness. The Lord does not accept dirt, which means what? The Lord itself is equatable to a human being. Because if say you're a princess, right, and you're clean, you only want clean people to come to you. You don't want, some stinky person. So in the same way, if God is like that, who is clean and pure, then means what? I only want pure people. So this regular form of worship ends up into this sort of superimposition between human attributes put onto God. And then we have to go through these protocols in order to appease the particular deity that is in that tradition or in that temple. Feed and bring bananas or some apples. It depends what culture. Now, all of these things they have a purpose and they're fine. But we'll just categorize it so you can see the difference between these lower form, these stepping stones, and how it eventually leads to seeing there's more to this. It cannot be this limiting. So that's when we start to discover this Advaita Bhakti. So the lower form is, once again, things like decorating God, because why? I want to appease him. And if I appease him or her, whoever that deity is, then what? I will get some credit back, some punya, karma, and then maybe, he will marry off my daughter. This is a transaction, actually, a negotiation between God. It's a business person. So then we sort of kind of settle for this, this devotion, and it's fine. It goes on for a while. It can go for several lifetimes, but then eventually it matures itself. Also, Shankaracharya Adi, so he wrote a beautiful Parapuja, and he said, oh Lord, how can I offer you an asanam? You're the substratum of the entire cosmos. How can I offer you an asanam to satisfy you when you are the very principle which pervades even the asanam itself? And even that person who attempted to do the asanam. How can I appease you by offering you limited things when you are in all the limited things that I offer you? It is only my narrow mind that wants to offer you an apple or a banana or a prayer and give it to you so that you may what? Recognize my love for you, and then you can what? Acknowledge my need to connect. How can I do that if you are already everywhere? So this is that high form of worship, understanding. Well, how can I wash your feet and bow down to you when you are formless? Who is there to bow down to if Ishvara is formless? Because we can only bow down to what? Form. So how can I bow down to a limited God? So you can see how a jnani starts to look at the world differently than an ordinary person. It also does not mean that a wise person is not going to go to temples. I see this all the time. They still go and appreciate because you can. It's just your expression of love. But they don't have to. That's the difference. There's a difference between I get to and I have to. What is I have to? Because I feel small. And if I do this particular ritual, the siyajna, then I will feel a little bit better. I feel a little bit fuller. So that's the difference. So to a wise person, these pujas are meaningless. They're irrelevant, basically. That's what we're saying. They have no meaning because what? You cannot be away from the truth. It's just like to a small child, toys are very meaningful. But when you grow up, the very toys that you would fight over and pull your sister's hair now are just generally meaningless. They're valueless because you just see the truth of that. It's not like you're putting down the toys, you just see toys, right? Toys, it's just that. There's nothing more. In the same way, the wise person doesn't put anything down, they just see temple. That's it. And also even inviting God becomes meaningless. How can you invite what is already there? And to invite what means instantly Dvaita Bhakti. That means God wasn't there before and now I need to what? Invite him from some different existence to come into this existence so that I can appreciate that existence which wasn't there prior to the prayer. So even prayer, what's the point? Who are you praying to? You're already established in the truth. So how can I pray to what's already the fact? Of course, prayer has its purpose, by the way. We can invoke certain devatas, and they do provide benefits, but that's a different topic. How do you think the jnani's expression of bhakti looks like? The jnani's expression of bhakti is in the very appreciation of the nature of Ishvara in all things. Everywhere I look is Ishvara. And that is what? Knowledge. That's not an emotion. That is knowledge. So a jnani's expression of devotion is in the form of what? Knowledge. Not knowledge as in I know something. I'm talking knowledge as in I'm rooted in that knowledge. Just like you're rooted in the knowledge of driving a car. You don't have to think about it. It's just normal. In other words, it's good. So in other words, it's never expressed and it's expressed all the time. It's expressed all the time that it doesn't look like a individual expression. Okay, and how does he worship? Perception of me means what? Krishna, Ishvara. Perception of me everywhere. That's it. And when are you not perceiving things? Never. You're always perceiving things. In other words, as long as you're perceiving things in this world of form, you're always what? For a jnani standpoint, you're always witnessing only Ishvara. Which means you don't have to do anything. You just look at a cloud, Ishvara. But in the worldly way, I have to go into the temple to look at some form which represents reverence, to feel that connection. Whereas for a jnani, just perception alone is what? Bhakti. That's Advaita Bhakti. So in other words, this person resorts to this vision or submits or owns up to the fact that all that is here is one without a second. What does this mean, one without a second? Oneness which pervades the multiplicity, consciousness. So he or she resorts to this vision of oneness and through knowledge. How? Through practice. It's not just intellectual, like I know this, and that's it. It's constantly practiced, and then it's so practiced that it's automatic. It's unconscious, it's normal, spontaneous, organic, natural, unstoppable. Can't help it. That kind of knowledge. So sarva bhuta sthitam yo mam. He worships me everywhere, even though he or she is what? Engaged in their duties, engaged in swadharma, engaged in the world. It's kind of like karma yoga. You're doing your duties, but you're always doing it for what? You're offering your actions to Ishvara. Okay.
So when you come up to issues of conflict, you've got to see the Ishvara in the conflict.
Conflict?
If you've got circumstances which are conflicting.
Then you address, that's just Swadharma, you need to address the conflict, but you never lose who you're actually speaking to. That's another good point, because in conflict mode, we often ignore the self. That's the only time that we kind of put the self aside, and we just say, this is time for conflict. I don't need that class stuff right now. I need to address the world stuff. That means what? You're not firmly established in yourself. To be firmly established, like unyankable, unmovable by the winds of... Is that the right word? Unyankable? Cannot be yanked. unmovable, unblowable by the winds of Maya, right? Despite the hardships of life, that is your test. If you still know, if you're exactly certain of yourself in those moments, no different than in class, then you know you've got it. I mean, you got it means what? That means you've done your work, you've done the hard work, as we spoke a lot in verse 29 last week. Hard work through practice. So the wise person never loses track that I'm actually speaking to Ishvara, and this automatically changes the attitude where it's not going to be so harsh, so rude. There's going to be a certain level of respect if I know constantly that actually I'm only speaking to a different form pervaded by the one self. It automatically changes the attitude. And so this person remains in what's called Advaita drishti. Drishti means vision. In this non-dual vision of what? Of that oneness, which is chaitanyam, consciousness, while still attending to the duties of the world. So just so that's clear, attend the duties, but never lose track of who you are. And this person worships me without any special action or any special devotion. They are established in worship. They are worship itself. They're an embodiment of worship. Why? Because knowledge says I can never be away from Atman. And Atman is what? Atma darshanam equals Ishvara darshanam. This wise person does not have any special puja like a worldly person, a ajnani. Such a person's puja we can call jnanam yajna. Yajna is worship. So worship of what? Knowledge. What does this mean, to worship knowledge? It means that the knowledge itself causes me to worship. Not as in a book, I'm worshiping a book or something. But the assimilation of the knowledge ends up what? Creating an attitude of constant reverence to the world. Jnanam yajna. The worship of knowledge of what? That all that is here is Ishvara. In other words, the very appreciation of Lord, Bhagavan, in all things is the puja of a wise person. So, question, what is the worship of a wise person? The very appreciation of God everywhere. That's a very simple answer. That means there's no place where he cannot find this worship. Sarvata vartamanaha api. So even though he is engaged in the world, he does or she does not have any particular practice, religious practice. A jnani, a wise person, may look like the most unreligious person in the world. Like the most unspiritual person. So it's very tricky to see a jnani. Why? What did we just say earlier? They do not have any particular worship. You do not see them ringing bells, offering flowers, lighting incense sticks. Why? Because their worship is what? Appreciation of the Lord 24/7 from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. So they're just having a normal time. And if we look at them, it's like, where do you ever spend time for God? They're already established in that very truth. Thus they look what? Very irreligious, very normal, very worldly. See how counterintuitive that actually is. Also in Vedanta, often people think, your bhakti's gone. If you're in Vedanta, that's a common complaint. Where's your devotion? You don't ever spend time in the temple. You're just a normal person, just working, nothing special, right? Now, why is this a complaint? Because a wise person's bhakti has reached what? An invisible dimension, a formless dimension. Whereas a non-wise person's bhakti is what? Very visible. Flower, walk up to the altar, devote. Whereas a jnani's bhakti is invisible. So it's a different level, it's a different dimension. At the beginning, there's a maturity process. Like when two people come together, right, they're what? They're very physical with each other. A lot of kissing, hugging, they can't get away from each other. They're sending, Valentine's cards, Mother's card, Father's Day card, Valentine's card, birthday card for everything, right? So it's very physical. And then what happens after some time? Well, the love matures, right? You don't have to sort of demonstrate how I love you by sending you a whole bunch of flowers and cards and more matter. Because the love is understood as it's there, whether we show each other or not. It's just there. So it doesn't have to be this expression of very physical, tangible giving and taking.
But it can be.
It can be also, but I'm just from the aspect of maturity. So in the same way, this bhakti turns from very physical and offering, and it's like very religious person, like very knots in the hair, how you call these, dreadlocks, and chains and om beads and all that. Very gross, very spiritual, very visible. Like right, they've got their stuff. Posture straight, they're excellent. All of this stuff eventually subsides, and the person ironically returns back to an ordinary human being, and then we call them non-religious. But why? Because they've gone through this stage of very physical, tangible bhakti. So, Jnani's bhakti is never expressed in a regular form. It is very irregular. It is invisible. It is non-tangible. It's reached a different dimension. So this means whatever the lifestyle of a wise person, whether they are a grahasta ashrama, which means what? A householder, whether they're a brahmacharya, which is equatable to a sannyasi, which means what? They have renounced the world, or they're a vanaprastha. Vanam in Sanskrit means forest. They've retired to the forest, vanam prastha. It doesn't matter what their lifestyle is. That's the important point. So you can never actually pick out a jnani by their lifestyle, because that could be an ordinary person working in construction or some kind of an ordinary job, right? But they're fully established in their, rooted in the truth. Most of the transformation is within, and you never see the inner transformation of a person, do you? Because we cannot see the contents of somebody else's mind. We can kind of pick up certain attitudes, how they talk, how they carry themselves, but so what? You can have a really professional salesperson who's super charming, so he doesn't really tell you anything. So to pick up a wise person by their behavior is not possible. Of course, now someone's going to say it is possible if you feel it, and there's a truth to that.
From the Swadharma. From the Swadharma.
Well, Swadharma, I mean, Arjuna Swadharma used to kill the Kauravas. And he's very wise. And Krishna also had to participate in certain situations. If you watch the Mahabharata, he also had to kill Kansa. Oh yeah, he was a kid, and so he had to eliminate him because he was a problem to the society. So this means duty never gets erased. The duty is always there. It's firm. But one never loses track of who they are. That's the difference. Whereas for a worldly person, they forget who they are while they're performing their duties. Mai vartate. The last word. So sa yogi mai vartate. So he, that is the jnani, is in me and I am in him. So this means that this person does not go to temples to see God, as I've said, because God is not confined to temples, is not confined to 4 to 5 p.m. or a certain time or a certain place in a certain country, in a certain suburb, even though, as I said, in the initial stages, we absolutely require this. Why? Because the mind's still gross, and what does the gross mind identify with? Gross objects. Thus, we need a physical Jesus. We need a physical Krishna. We need a physical Rama, a physical Dakshinamurti, Vishnu, whoever it is. Because why? It represents the condition of the mind. That's how you can tell the general condition of the person. If they're very gross, it means what? Their mind, they're still working on their mind to make it more subtle. The more the mind gets subtle, the less these worldly religious practices are required. Actually, a nice story. One time a jnani came into a temple, and there were devotees who were worshipping Shiva Lingam. So for them, God is in a lingam, right? They see Shiva. Shiva is a representation for, in their ways, God. And the jnani directed his feet towards the Shiva Lingam, which is something you don't do. And one of the devotees said, how can you turn your feet towards the Shiva? That's rude. So what did the jnani say? Oh, I'm sorry. Please point my feet towards where Shiva is not. In other words, the jnani was testing, trying to teach the lesson to this devotee. So to this devotee, Shiva is only here. As soon as you go 45 degrees out, Shiva is not there. Only here. So the devotee couldn't do it because he realized, oh, wait a minute. I can't turn his feet anywhere because Shiva is everywhere. So this is what a jnani understands. The Ishvara is not located to a specific form or specific place. He is in me and I am in him. In other words, we are inseparable. Okay, 632. Atma upam yena sarvatra samam pashyati Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukham sayogi paramo mataha. What he's saying here is the jnani's mind here expands. That means their understanding expands. So they identify with all bodies. Before the knowledge, they only identify with their own bodies. Now, they do not know the difference between their body and another body. Why? Because if I say I am a person, that instantly localizes me to this person. But if I understand that I am Atman, and what do we say about Atman? All-pervading consciousness, then how can I say that this person is any different or any better or any... How can I identify myself as this person? That's impossible. Because that which is all-pervading cannot know the difference between the person that's speaking and the person that's listening. So in other words, what a wise person understands is that this Atma that pervades all bodies is not only in this body, but it is also in all bodies. This is stage 2, as we spoke about last week. That my consciousness that is operating through this body is also your consciousness operating through these bodies, all bodies. For this wise person, all bodies basically become like my own body. But for a non-wise person, my body is my body, your body is your body. See the difference? So for a wise person, your body is not different than my body. Your mind is not different from mine. Why? Because I, consciousness, pervade these bodies. And from your standpoint, I, consciousness, pervade all bodies. So whichever way you look at it from, it's the same consciousness pervading principle operating through all bodies. So thus, it is not possible for a jnani, of course there is a relative recognition, but they do not see the difference between your body and their body. Okay, can you hurt yourself? Nobody wants to hurt themselves. So this means because the jnani now identifies with all bodies and they don't want to hurt themselves, that means what? They find it impossible to hurt others. There is a universal identification as opposed to a singularity identification, to an individual identification. So previously, person's body was exclusive and it deserved, certain pleasures. How does the phrase go? I want to have my cake and eat it too. But now the identification has shifted because the universal identity, what happens is that jnani becomes an embodiment of what? Compassion, as Martin said, empathy, and ahimsa, non-injury. Because if I hurt you, I'm hurting myself because I am in you. And from your standpoint, I am in you still. So this means that the wise person is capable of feeling other people's pain because they're not apart from every other body. In other words, they appreciate the pain of everyone. Not enjoy everyone's pain, but appreciate. What does it mean to say appreciate? There's an empathy, accommodation. Yeah, compassion. So I see your pain, so I'm not going to ignore it. I'm at least going to take a moment to appreciate it. I don't have to do anything, but I can just still appreciate it. So Krishna is now going to say, Atma upamyena sarvatra pashyati. keeping himself or herself as the standard in all. Because the person looks at himself, knows himself as Atma, and also Atma pervades all other bodies, thus the expression becomes equal towards this body and that body, because we're both pervaded by self. Whereas before, exclusivity, not so exclusive. Okay. Samam pashyati yaha Arjuna. Here Krishna is saying a wise person does not have partiality. In other words, there's no selfishness, because partiality means what? I am apart from a different part. But because Atman is no part, thus there is no partiality, says Krishna to Arjuna. Why? Because a jnani identifies with all bodies equally. Before, I only identify with this body. Now, this body is just another body, another suit that's going to drop away. Just like, do you actually care if you throw your clothes away in a closet? You just put them away, you put on new clothes on, you don't think about it. In the same way, a wise person does not really care if these clothes go off, and they will go off one day. So what? It's just clothes. You temporarily wear this suit in the world to operate till the last breath. You do what you do, and then let it go. But why? Because there's no identification with it anymore. So this person then follows universal value, and that universal value is, I do not do unto others. Why? Because they identify with everyone equally. And if they do hurt, what happens is instantly, even a thought of hurting someone, instantly it's registered as a pain, like a knife. Why? Because the mind is so sensitive. Sukham va yadi va dukham. Okay, interesting statement. So the happiness, he sees happiness and suffering alike in others. This is a big benefit, actually. The wise person sees no difference between suffering and happiness in other people. So what this means is, okay, before, what happens if someone's happy? We get jealous. They're happy, I'm not happy. Suppose someone's in love, right? And like, my God, they're really in love. They got something that I don't have. I want that. But what is a jnani? My consciousness is not apart from your consciousness. In other words, now a jnani, instead of finding jealousy or wanting to have my cake like that and eat it too, they get to what? Appreciate those two, that couple in love, and they get to what? Appreciate that as their own. In other words, you get to outsource all of the pleasure to the world. So that's the big benefit. For this reason, because the persons identify with everyone's happiness, they do not need to be happy themselves. Why? Because I'm already experiencing your happiness. I'm already experiencing the mother and the child coming together after a long time of not hugging, or some kind of a special moment, or a marriage event. How many of those events is going on right now, this second? Like that. But what does a worldly person want to do? He wants a share of that, or she wants a share of that. So I have to replicate to have a little bit of that too. What is a wise person? Abides in the self, which is not apart from you. Thus, they're constantly established in the highest truth, in the highest enjoyment possible. I think I said this a couple verses ago. In the highest contentment possible. Because I'm already pervading you. And from your standpoint, I'm already pervading you. So whoever's having joy, I'm having joy. Whoever's having suffering, I also feel that suffering. I appreciate that suffering. Means what? Compassion, empathy. I don't have to do anything about it. This is what a wise person is saying, but I can still feel it. And I can still, because I appreciate it, I can do something if there is something to do about it. So here a universal love of a jnani is indicated. And that universal love is paramo, paramaha, the greatest love possible. In other words, such a person is the most accomplished person in the world. The greatest, most accomplished yogi is the one who cannot tell the difference between themselves and another person. This is going to bring me to one more point. If you're in Vedanta, you will get a complaint sooner or later from someone that's important to you. You know what the most common complaint is if you're in Vedanta? You're selfish. You're spending all this time on self-knowledge, going here, learning about this truth. If you haven't got a complaint yet, you're probably not doing hard work enough, right? So, this is also a complaint of a sannyasi. You know, sannyasis going off into the woods, you know, they're pursuing liberation, they're not doing their duties, they're getting away from the world. Come back. So what happens is people try to pull us back. Why? Because that's the only way they know, and it's been going like that for endless janmas, endless births. So if someone tries to pull you back, you know, you address that according to the relationship you have with them. So how does Krishna now deal with this statement? Because it's an interesting statement. Like, yeah, what about those people who just give up everything? Well, not give up, but they just are into truth. Krishna says, yeah, you are selfish. In fact, you're the most selfish person in the world. Now, he's going to give a reason why. It's very interesting. Why are you the most selfish person in the world? Because the one who pursues knowledge goes to extreme length to what? Detach from worldly things in order to reattach the entire universe. I have to detach from one person in order to reattach to the whole. I have to detach from one family to re-identify with all families. I have to detach from one house to recognize the entire universe is my house. So what does this mean? A jnani is the most selfish person. Why? Only so that they can what? Re-identify and become the most selfless person in the world. So what? One goes through this journey of initial selfishness, and it's probably going to be prominent and visible to others who love you, who are close to you, and there's going to be complaints, no doubt. If it is, understand, address it to the best of your ability, but understand that almost everyone goes through this journey of receding or withdrawing inwards in order to what? Figure out, who am I? So firmly, so solidly that nobody can pull me back. Only so that I can what? Come out and re-identify with the entire universe, the entire existence itself. So don't take it hard if someone is giving you a hard time. Okay? Everyone has to go through this. Even those people who are giving you a hard time will also, in the next life, be married who someone's going to be complaining to them because they're going to be trying to figure that out. So appreciate the fact that you're doing hard work and pat yourself on the back. But please do not piss them off because then you're going to blame the class. You're going to get turned off from Vedanta. You have a special relationship with them. I don't know how you're going to deal with that, but please do deal with that because you cannot ignore Ishvara. They're also Ishvara in a different form. Yeah. So this person breaks, once again, from a few finite relationships only to what? Relate to the whole world. In other words, I do not belong to one person, no more. I belong to what? The whole world. Before, I only belonged to one person. And that was ironically causing pain. Because we identify that we are limitless. And there's some inherent understanding that if I just am drawn and just stuck with this one person, one family, this feels something limiting about that. We don't know what it is, but we recognize it. We're sensitive enough. So what? We go inwards to detach, only to reattach with everything and everyone. So that's the journey and it's not easy sometimes. It is painful. So the self-knowledge, Atma-jnanam, is about withdrawing from the finite. Finite means what? Finite experiences, finite people, finite family, finite money, finite everything, only to re-identify with the infinite. Re-identifying with who we are involves what? Disidentifying with who we are not. Come back to us because we feel safer with you in our possession. All of this stuff is going to come out. So you have to be strong in this journey. That means your vision has to be clear. So that means you only have two choices. Either do not identify with anyone, or identify with everyone. Do not identify with anyone in particular, including your body, or identify with everyone. That's the only two choices you have. Basically, if you analyze that statement, you only got one choice. That is to...
I was going to say, I was so glad you asked.
It's a tricky one, right? Identify with everyone. Okay, so what are we doing? Withdrawing from limited identifications of the world as a mom, as a dad, as a parent, as a sister, as a brother, only so that we have limitless identification. And the limitless identification is where your freedom lies. So in other words, what do? You destroy the narrow I, the narrow, limited, selfish ego I, only to re-identify with the limitless I. In other words, summary, the truth is I belong to the whole creation and the whole creation belongs to me. And this is a result of jnanam, of knowledge. This is the benefit. Remember, we've been talking about the benefits of Vedanta. Next week, verse 33 to 36, we will talk about obstacles to meditation that we encounter and remedies to those obstacles, how to remove the obstacles during meditation. Because if you can remove those obstacles, then you can arrive to this benefit. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.